Welcome everybody to this breakout session. I'm Jonathan, and my team and I are responsible for Insights here at the Linux Foundation. And as some of you might already know, we did a big release to Insights a few weeks ago, and I want to use this session today to introduce a bit the concept behind Insights and also give you a bit of the background story. First of all, I would be curious, who of you used Insights before? Okay, a few people from the Linux Foundation. All right, cool. Just good to know. So I want to start a bit with the motivation behind why we are building Insights. And I think we all know here at the conference that open source is the backbone of modern software. It's running our phones, our clouds, and even our energy grid. But the problem is that a tiny piece of software in a dependency can break systems globally, as we have seen it with Heartbleed, with LeftPad, or almost with the XD backdoor. The reality is that most dev teams today rely on hundreds to thousands of open source packages they've never even really looked at. So they're basically flying blind when it comes to what's in their stack. One of the reasons for that is that we as an open source community still lack a common way to evaluate projects and take actions accordingly. As a result, maintainers don't get the attention that they deserve, and their projects stay underfunded. And users and developers on the other side, they onboard risky projects into the supply chain that they should not. So to solve that, we believe that we miss transparent data and also shared metrics to evaluate open source projects. Because if I'm a developer who has to select a dependency for their stack, I don't want to just rely on GitHub stars or when was the last commit. I want to know how many active maintainers are there, how diverse is the contributor base, how quickly are issues being resolved, is a project doing security audits, are there any known vulnerabilities, and so on. So with Insights, we basically try to solve this problem. Insights is a product that delivers public and standardized metrics on critical open source projects. Our goal is to create a platform that anyone can use to evaluate project health across multiple dimensions and understand areas of attention. To do that, we collect data from over 20 sources, including code repositories, social platforms, package managers, mailing lists, and so on. We take all that data, feed it into an evaluation framework that shows us then the strengths and weaknesses of an open source project. I want to highlight that this is not about shaming maintainers, but really to support them, because if we understand which projects need help, we can contribute to them, we can also fund them, or help in any other way possible. Besides that, Insights is really for all stakeholders of the open source ecosystem. That means maintainers, users, security teams, or even foundation governance. Insights today, or until now, covered all Linux Foundation projects, and we are very excited to announce here at OSS Summit that we are also rolling it out to selected critical non-Linux Foundation projects. So this is live since a few weeks now. So my team and I took over Insights at the end of last year, and while the concept of an open source analytics tool, if you want so, seems simple, the devil is really in the details. There's lots of great research and work on analyzing open source projects, so we actually did not have to invent any of the metrics ourselves, but the challenge was, how do you productize open source metrics and build a product that really works on a large scale? Because I think what's unique about Insights is that it's public, it's free to use, anyone can go there, you don't need to sign up or anything, and it covers over 20 different sources. So we not just cover GitHub data, but like lots of other data points as well. So I want to use this talk a bit to explain the thinking that went into the concept of Insights. So I think one can break down the concept behind Insights into three main challenges. The first one is which projects are critical. So everyone agrees that Linux kernel or Kubernetes or OpenSSL are critical projects, but there are like thousands of smaller libraries, one or two layers deep in the dependency graph, and they're equally relevant for things like supply chain security. So the question is, how do we identify these projects beyond just looking at the top 10 most downloaded projects in some package ecosystems. The second challenge is how do we define project health? So project goes from low-level libraries to complex frameworks with hundreds of repositories. Some are hobby projects, others have large teams of paid maintainers. So the question is, how do you kind of find metrics that apply to all of them while still considering all the nuances between open source projects? Because I think we all agree that no open source project is the same. And the third challenge is that open source data is frankly a mess, because open source projects live across different platforms. Many are on GitHub, some are on GitLab, others have self-hosted Git servers. Mailing list formats vary. Community discussions happen in different places, like on Slack or Discord or Discourse. So we need to find a way to get all that data. We need to clean it, and we also need to get things like organization affiliation or maintainer roles correctly, so we can actually do meaningful analysis with the data later. So let's dive into the first challenge, which is how to define which projects are critical. And we understand that critical can be controversial in that context, because what we don't want to do is create an exclusive club of large projects, but at the same time we have limited resources, so we need to allocate the resources to the projects that have the most impact on our ecosystem. We decided to rely on the OpenSSF criticality score for this. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a method that considers project age, contributor count, commit rhythm, release cadence, and dependency reach. The great thing about it is that you can easily calculate it for many projects, and at the same time it's flexible, and we can extend it with more data points as we gather more information. So based on the criticality score, we created what we call the LF Open Source Index. The LF Open Source Index is basically a directory of the open source projects the world relies on. There are over 400 million repositories on GitHub today, but if you look at the research, 10,000 projects are the ones that really matter, because they're used by companies in production around the world. So that's why we decided to just take the top 10,000 projects by criticality score and onboard them to the LF Open Source Index. So in practice, if you now go to Insights, you will see a tree map of open source, which you can sort by software value, which if you were at the keynote this morning, Frank Nagel talked about. Basically what we do here is we calculate the software value for all open source projects, and then we look at the different categories. And for example, in this case, you can see that the combined software value of all developer tools is 63 billion. You can also sort it by contributor count, so how many unique people contributed to the projects in those categories. And obviously, you can also go further down. So we're like on the highest level right now. You can get a preview of the subcategory, in this case, programming languages and frameworks. I can go one deeper, and I can see a full view of all programming languages and frameworks subcategories. So for example, web development frameworks. I can go even one further and see all the different categories for web development. And at the end, at the last level, I can actually get a list of the projects that we have onboarded to Insights. So in that case, that's front-end web frameworks. And I could, for example, go to Next.js and take a look at the Next.js project page. So now that we know which projects we want to cover, I want to go to our second challenge, which is how do we assess project health? And to assess project health, we basically look at 4 different dimensions. Each of the dimensions is meant to answer you one core question. So the first one is contributors, which tells us who's contributing to a project on behalf of which company. For that, we look at metrics like contributor and organizational diversity, contributor retention, or how many active contributors there were in the last month. The second dimension is popularity, so how well is a project being adopted. For this, we assess things like package downloads, Google search volume or social mentions on platforms like Reddit or Hacker News or Twitter. We also look at GitHub stars and forks, even though you have to use them. I think you have to use them with caution. If you use them in a mix, they can still be a good signal. The third dimension is development. So how actively is a project being maintained? For this, we check out metrics like how many pull requests were there per month, how many active days there are, or what's the merge time, or also things like how quickly are issues being resolved by the project. And last but not least, we also look at security and best practices, which is, I guess, self-explanatory. We work with the baseline project for that, and they help us to check out things like access control, documentation, license, or vulnerability tracking. So each of these 4 dimensions consist of several metrics, like I mentioned. And for each of the metrics, we define benchmarks. So depending on the benchmark, a metric can get usually up to 5 points. And we sum up those points, and in the end, that gets us to a score that goes from 0 to 100. We then group that score into 5 different categories, which rank from critical, which is kind of on the bad side, and excellent, which are very healthy projects. I believe that no single metric can really tell you if an open source project is healthy or not. But if you kind of take a mix of all these different kind of metrics, it seems to be quite a reasonable approach to get a realistic picture of how a project is doing. So let's check out how this looks in practice. Here you can see the project page for Kubernetes. And I can very quickly understand the project health of Kubernetes is excellent. I can also get some project information on the right, like project criticality. I can see that Kubernetes is in the top 100 according to the OpenSSF criticality score. I can also see the software value. I'm not sure if you can read that, but it's there. And can also get information like when was the first commit, so basically when was the project started. I also get to see the 4 different dimensions that I just talked about. In this case, contributors and all the benchmarks that we applied for it, and the same for popularity, development, and security and best practices. I can also investigate this further and then clicks on any of the tabs in the header, and for example, look at contributors, where I would see things like contributors leaderboard or organization leaderboard. You will also see that some of the metrics will have benchmarks on the right. Those will be the metrics that we consider for the overall health score. Other metrics, like leaderboards, if you would want to call it a metric, they don't have benchmarks, usually because we didn't find a smart way yet to define benchmarks for it. But if anyone has ideas, I'm always open to that. There's 2 more things that I want to highlight here. First one is that any of the widgets you will find throughout the app, you can easily report issues by clicking on any widget, and then you can fill out details, and we'll usually get back to you in like 48 hours. Because one of the things that we found is, for us, like kind of from a 10,000 feet perspective, some projects might look right, and the leaderboard and those things look right to us. But if you're actually a maintainer of that project or a user of that project, you might spot some things immediately because you're just so much more familiar with it than we are. So we really need your help. If you find something that is off, just let us know and we'll fix it. The second thing I wanted to highlight is that you can also include some of the metrics, like for example, the health score on your GitHub README. We've already seen the first major projects like Helm adopt this. So I think that's a pretty exciting way to also share this with your users and also build trust with developers. So next I want to talk a bit about the infrastructure behind Insights. To realize Insights, we built what we internally call Community Data Platform. Community Data Platform is the successor of Crowd.dev, which is a tool my team and I built before we joined the Linux Foundation last year. Community Data Platform basically pulls data from the 20 different sources I talked about, so code repositories, social media platforms, mailing lists, package managers, and so on. So far, we collected over 7 billion data points on open source ecosystems, from which we created 3 million contributor profiles and 700,000 organization profiles. Community data platform is basically the foundation for everything that you can see in Insights. I now want to talk about the third challenge, getting to a clean data set. For that, I want to share a brief story with you about a fictional contributor called Max. So we want to figure out Max open source affiliation. So on behalf of which company did Max do his open source contributions? So we can see here a timeline of Max's open source contributions. We see that he did his first pull request to Kubernetes in 2019. He did one to Linux kernel a bit after, and then a few more pull requests to Kubernetes in the years after. So when we onboard the data from Max to LFX, we see that his GitHub profile says he's working for a company called Acme Research Lab. So what we do is we record all his open source contributions to that company. But it turns out later that Max actually switched his job in 2020, and he only started working for Acme Research Lab after. We know that because he signed up for KubeCon in 2020 with a company called Quantum Intel. So what we do, we reassign or reaffiliate all his contributions before 2020 to the new company called Quantum Intel. But for Quantum Intel only paid Max for his Kubernetes contributions, and his Linux kernel contribution was actually something he did in his free time. So we should affiliate that Linux kernel contribution with kind of a personal affiliation. For Acme Research Lab, we now find out that it's just a business unit of a larger company called Acme Corporation. So actually all the affiliations should go to Acme Corporation. And now that we did that, we find out that Acme Corporation was acquired by a company called Novatech in 2024. So the question is, what do we do now? Like, affiliate all his contributions with Novatech starting from 2024 or even before, because they arguably even acquired the IP and with that also open source contributions. I think that's pretty confusing, right? And if you now also consider that Max is not giving us any of that information, but we have to get it, he's using multiple GitHub accounts, multiple email addresses, you might start to understand the scale of the problems that we sometimes look at. Because we actually see cases like this pretty much every day. And if I would have to estimate 50% of our engineering time goes into building automations and systems that can solve these kind of data issues on scale. Because our ambition is to build really the most accurate data set possible, also getting things like organizational affiliations or maintainer roles correct. So let's check out how we approach this. Basically, to improve the data quality in Insights, we created the following process. First, we onboard the raw data, for example, from sources like GitHub, which usually brings us to 20 to 30% correctness when it comes to things like organizational affiliations. We take the data and we run it through several data pipelines. We clean the data, we enrich it with different sources, and we deduplicate the data. After that, we usually have a lot of conflicting information, like in the example of Max that I just talked about. For that, we developed several AI agents that go over these conflicts, and they tell us what to do with that data and resolve 98% of them. Then in the last step, we also actually have humans, our data quality team, who go and take a look at the data and manually fix conflicts and also review profiles. So in the last year alone, I think we reviewed about 50,000 profiles manually. When we do that, we usually prioritize profiles that have more activity because there's just a massive power law in open source. A few thousand contributors actually did 95% of all the work in all the open source projects that we tracked. So if you just get these few thousand people right, the whole data set will look a lot better. And last but not least, like I mentioned before, we also rely on user feedback to get to 90% plus X correctness. I think I also want to highlight that we'll probably never get to 100%, but I think with the help of the users and the help of their different communities that we work with, we can get close to it. So this is an example of how the results of our data efforts actually look like. On the left side, overall you can see the top 10 organizations opening pull requests in PyTorch. On the left side, you can see the raw GitHub data as you can find it on tools like LFX Insights. On the right, you can see the leaderboard from Insights. And notably, I'm not sure if you can see that, but we have Meta on one in Insights with 53% of all opened pull requests in PyTorch. While if you look at the raw data that GitHub has, you can see Facebook with 3.6%, you can see Meta with 0.7%, and you can see Facebook Research with 0.2%. But even if you add them all up, you just get to 4.5%. So there's just a massive gap in affiliating the contributions that Meta employees are doing to PyTorch to the corporation. So this is not about blaming raw data or any other tools, but I just want to demonstrate the effort that has been going into that data set to get to a leaderboard like this. I also think that the Linux Foundation is in a unique position here because we have access to data sources like LFID. I also think we are far from done yet, and there's still some challenges that we are aware of. The first one is that data quality is a never-ending battle. Our focus so far has been mostly on getting contributors' data and organizations' data right, and I think the next focus is going to be on improving project data. So that means getting the name of each project right, getting the logo right, getting the description right, getting the right repositories mapped to a project, and so on. So there's also a lot of hidden edge cases still in that data set. But also for organization affiliations, we still have things to do. For example, we haven't onboarded affiliation files yet. So those are the files that projects usually manage themselves in their GitHub repository. So we need to find a way to onboard these files for 10,000s of repositories. That's something we're going to do. And yeah, as I mentioned, we need the support from all of you to also let us know if something is wrong with the data. Another open challenge is the criticality score. It seems like a very reasonable approach to get all relevant projects if you, for example, take the top 10,000. But the ranking in itself does not seem 100% reliable yet. Because if you look at the top 100, for example, you will find that there's, for example, repositories that only include documentation or only include a SDK. So it's a question if those are really among the top 100 most critical projects. We might want to add more data points to that. We might have to adjust the weights of the criticality score a bit, but that's still something we need to work on. Also, the LF Open Source Index still needs some better categorization. It turns out that there was not really a categorization system for open source before we tackled that. So we kind of had to create that from scratch. We took inspiration from technology providers like Gartner to do that, but the categorization that we came up with for open source still has its flaws, especially when it comes to kind of the industry view. And last but not least, we need to work on automating and scaling our project onboarding. Right now, it's a manual process, so we've manually onboarded a few, I think, 17,000 repositories. So we need to find ways to automate this, and we also have to find ways to scale our infrastructure, because we have 7 billion data points today, and for the amount of projects that we want to onboard, we have to get to at least 10x of that. So there's also a lot of work to be done on the infrastructure side. Yeah, I want to highlight again that we cannot do this without the help of the community, and we also want to discuss the metrics, the benchmarks, and the evaluation frameworks that we came up with all of you, and want to encourage everybody to join feedback. So with that, I'm also excited that we can announce that Insights is open source now. We wanted to make the process behind Insights as transparent as possible, and also create a platform for us to discuss Insights with the community. So if you want to get involved with Insights, please check out our repo. Feel free to open issues, feel free to open or join discussions. We're all excited to welcome you there. So I want to close with what's planned for next year. First of all, we want to onboard the top 10,000 critical projects. Today, we have about 100 of like 100 external projects, so there's still a very long way to go for us. We also want to keep adding more data sources and metrics to Insights and keep improving the health score. We want to make Insights more actionable. This is actually a big one because, for example, we show that certain projects have problems, but we don't show recommendations on what to do yet. And I think that's the next step, saying, hey, your contributor retention is low. Here's like some documentation or some ideas on how you could improve that. Other ideas for making Insights more actionable are, for example, for the user, that the user is able to do one-to-one project comparison or create their own custom collections so they can track projects. And last but not least, we also want to make sure that we connect Insights more with other LFX products. First of all, individual dashboard is going to allow you to self-report your affiliations at the end of the summer, I think. And also, if you're using organization dashboard, you will be able to monitor your organization's dependencies or the projects that you care about the most as a company. So you kind of get the meta insights from Insights to organization dashboard. Yeah, with that, I'm done with my breakout session. Again, if you want to get involved, check out Insights. The link is insights.linuxfoundation.org. If you're a maintainer, feel free to include your Insights badge on your README. Feel free to join the discussion on GitHub. And if you have any personal questions to me, there's also my email address here. And yeah, thank you all for listening. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm just curious. It's something that we've been looking at as well as the organizational affiliations, even individual affiliations from that perspective. I'm just curious what some of the current thoughts are on incentivization that way. Obviously, yes, it's a good thing to put it out there for them to self-report, if you will.
Yeah.
But what are some ways that maybe are in thought? Because this is just under Insights, but this will need to be other smaller groups or ecosystems when you look at this as well. So I don't know if there's anything that's shareable that way.
Yeah, I mean, one idea would be to kind of create an affiliation file that just like a template that projects can use, right? Because what we found is that most projects have their own way to do affiliations, and that kind of makes it tricky to pass that data automatically. We had the same issue when we onboarded maintainer roles, because also projects have files where they say, hey, those people are maintainers, those are in the technical committee, and so on. So we were able to solve that for maintainer roles, so I think we'll also be able to do that for affiliations. But I think it's a good idea to actually come up with a template where we say, hey, this is kind of best practice. If you want to have an affiliation file, we recommend you to use this template so also other tools can easily take and pass the data without so much effort.
And just a small follow-up, are there any thoughts or conversations with Federa around DIDs and how to link that up?
No, not that I'm aware of. There was, I think, the gentleman in the back was first.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that I think the last sentence of your talk was the most relief-inducing one for me, which is the self-reporting. Like that, to me, is absolutely the gold standard, and everything else is reading the tea leaves. But I've always wondered why there wasn't a facility from the beginning for people to say, like, this year I was working for this company, but I worked on these projects, but something else in other ones. Anyway, it's great that things are moving in that direction. The other thing that I would like to plead with you to do is when I look at the projects that I'm very familiar with, I find many, many instances where the things that Insights say are contradicting to things I know are true about affiliations in countries. Almost anything I think people dig into, I find many flaws, but which wouldn't be so bad, except that it's impossible to find out why. Like, I would love if everything that you could, every number, every graph, everything on the site says that, 80% of the contributions are for this country, but you know that the contributor who does 75% of the work is from somewhere else. Like, what is the misunderstanding exactly that leads to all data being wrong? And I think just having the ability to inspect all of that for a project would be immensely helpful in just knowing where to start to correct it.
Yeah, I mean, to that, I know it wasn't really a question, but maybe if I can still answer to that. We also invest a lot of work into documentation now, and I think there's still a lot of work to do. So I'll take that point with me.
I've noticed a lot of open source projects join different foundations, and the different foundations have different influence to the open source projects. I was wondering, any thoughts on reporting the foundation's influence on these projects and insights?
Yeah, so basically, let me go back a bit, because we have, okay, sorry, here. So this module, we basically call it collections, and we have the same for foundations. So you can also, if you use the search in Insights, you can also look for foundations, and you get an overview of all the projects that are in the foundation. Right now, you only get a few stats, like how many projects are there, what's the combined software value, what's the combined count of contributors, but we'll also introduce a few more kind of meta insights, so you can also compare what's the impact of this foundation versus this foundation. Yeah, so if you use Insights, I would just recommend just search for foundation and see what we got so far. Manish?
So what's the value of having to be an LF project compared to non-LF project?
Yeah.
I'm seeding this question so you can talk more about projects. We work together.
Yeah, I mean, overall, we can invest a lot more effort into projects that are part of the Linux Foundation. Also, for example, just for practical reasons like data privacy, we just have much more data on Linux Foundation projects, and the data quality for those is usually much higher than for the ones like external projects that we just onboarded, because for those we usually just have public data sources like GitHub and maybe some social data or package downloads, but we don't have kind of the chest of data that we have with the Linux Foundation projects.
Yeah, my name's Reed. I work at Google. I work on LLVM, and this is amazing. I don't really have like a question because I feel like you addressed it in the slide, which I wasn't going to see. But we tried to basically do this analysis for LLVM for Google Zone contributions, and we ran into all the problems you described that are covered in the slides. We had many people who went to Google at some point, but they were like project founders, and then they left Google later. And like the vast majority of their work was done not under the equipment. This is a huge problem for our own data analysis, and I'm super excited to see that you're working on this. Maybe we'll get better results soon.
That's great to hear. Thank you, and good to hear that we're not alone. Yes, please.
Similar comment. Work with the Department of Defense. I'm also really impressed with what I've seen here. So there's that. My question is going to be how, with the current dimensions you use to generate your analysis and scoring, how are you and what's the other contributors thinking about evolving those dimensions?
I mean, to be honest, I kind of see the dimension that we have now. It's kind of a proposal from us, because we thought, okay, we come up with a best guess, if you want so. We put it out there, we make it open source, and then we contribute with the community on improving it. So there's not a clear direction where I think it's going to be there in a year, but I really want to turn this into interactive discussion, where we can also, based on the feedback we get from maintainers and so on, improve it, maybe add dimensions, maybe remove dimensions. We'll see, but I think for now that's kind of our best guess.
I work on the Open Search project, and like some of the other folks that were super interested in this data, and had a similar challenge of where I've looked at some of these things and seen some things that didn't make sense. and I can't dig in and find out why. So how should I, do you want us to contact with you with a vague thing that says, I saw this data point and it doesn't look right and I don't know why?
Yeah,
Is
it's
that helpful to you? Or?
100%. I mean, as I mentioned, we really like throughout the app, you almost kind of miss it, like the report issue kind of functionality. So whenever you see that, or you see something is off, you can just go in there, just leave a short note. And we usually have like a turnaround time of like 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. And we look into that. If you see something.
Like some of them are like, I feel like I'm deeply involved in one particular repository.
Yeah.
And look at that.
Yeah.
I see some organization that I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that nobody works for that organization. So I can't give you any more specifics than that.
That's enough. I mean, you can just say, hey, this organization, like I'm a maintainer of that project or something like that. This org shouldn't show up. Can you take a look? Okay. Like I do this every day. Like I use this feature myself and just write very short notes. I mean, you can leave your email address. It's optional. So, I mean, ideally you do that so we can ask follow-up questions. But yeah, I mean, that's tremendously helpful for us.
That's what I meant about how inspection would be helpful. If you could just click on that board when you see it, it says, like, which contributor does it think is part of that organization? You know, like who to contact and what to do.
I mean, the thing is we need to find a balance between how easy it is to report something and people just do a lot of clicks and we get like hundreds of tickets versus taking the time to write a short note. So that's why we did this approach for now, also to prevent spam or bot activity.
One thing to add there, just from a privacy perspective, when we're thinking about it from the Linux Foundation, we don't necessarily want to tie it one-to-one to say, this person works here, because then that starts to get really creepy. And so, in general, what we're trying to say is, hey, we have a better data set because we're uniquely positioned through events like this. We get company data through different investments in our data pipeline that allows us to know who's writing the code on behalf of whom for what projects and when. And that's how we're trying our best to do that in a privacy, non-creepy, direct way, where we go, yeah, it might not be exactly perfect, but it's better. And it's better in a really meaningful way. But we're probably never going to tie like, oh, hey, Kieran works for Google, and see, we're making that association. It's never going to probably be that, but it can be better about engaging the community in that way to give you a sense of how we got there.
A little bit more on it. But in open source world, you mentioned a contributor get really upset when they see not so correct data, but they also get very upset when we ask for some detailed information from them. Like, okay, now you're getting into my privacy. So it's like a double-edged sword of like, if you go towards this, so we need to continuously keep balancing that out and then work within that.
But I guess like if the open source data was wrong because my GitHub repositories had something that was wrong about my affiliation, how does that feedback get back to me to fix it?
Well, so that's where we're going to tie together the individual dashboard. So your LFID, where you can actually come to the Linux Foundation, set yourself up and give us your data, give us permission to use your data, and have your projects go and say, hey, here's my individual data. We'd allow you to sort of do that, and then you can track that yourself. And that's how we want to empower the users through choice. Your projects to go, hey, you might not care, but anyway, hey, can the top 20 people go and just fill out this LFID, make sure it's good, and then our project data will show correctly. That's something we're doing as well. So connecting those data sources. Our LFID, which is our single sign-on for LF products, that has to do with our contributor license agreements, that has to do with the event registrations and things like this, and then also just your data. So that team will be connecting that data to that, and then you'll have you'll be able to control that, and then either choose to use it or not, or hide that, or also we have to be privacy compliant, so letting people actually opt out as well. So hopefully that answers.
I'm really curious about the actionable insights part. I mean, is there any narrative or story side of that that'll be shared as part of the project? Like cool success stories, like throughout the project help, maybe something got abandoned and someone else picked it up. Where would we follow along with that? Yeah, I mean,
it's still very early days for kind of the actual part. I think it's rather something on the horizon for the next 6 to 12 months. I don't have concrete plans for how this is going to look like. Also something where I'm just hoping for the feedback and hoping also to see how people use Insights. So yeah, it's still a bit unknown, to be honest. Okay. With that, one last question.
I'm working on the issue of affiliation to the LFX platform, so I don't know if you have any thoughts or ideas on how we can make it better. Please come speak to me. I would love to hear your thoughts.
And I'm working on the organization view of your project, so you can talk to me as well.
Yeah. We actually also have a booth here in the solutions hall. Not sure how it's called. So if you want to just come by and talk more, also with any of the other product managers from LFX, we'll be around. All right. Thank you.